record. Very good. And get my other stuff here. All right. So we are in, we're doing like basically an overview of Jews in England in the 19th century. We got up until about the 1860s, 1870s. But before we continue, I have a story to tell you that was told to me by Rabbi Dr. Dov Frimmer a few days ago. And I told him that I will share it with the class. For those of you who remember, we were discussing two individuals in the 18th century of Rabbi Emden and Rabbi Eibschutz, who had a very public war about one of them having written an amulet and the other saying he was a Sabbatean, and on and on and on and on and on. And there was a tremendous amount of bad blood between them. Fast forward to modern times, and there is a man whose name is Schneur Lehman, who is considered the world's authority on the Rabbi Yaakov Emden, Yonasan Eibschutz war. And he was giving a lecture somewhere in New York. I think the story is in New York. He's a very much in demand speaker about the topic, and he was giving a lecture at one of the shuls. And this was not that many years ago, I understood it. After the lecture, someone came up to him and said, "By the way, my last name is Emden." And worked out that it turned out that he was a relative, a direct descendant of Rabbi Yaakov Emden. Very nice. About a week later, he ended up in another shul, gave the same lecture. Another guy came up and said, "By the way, my last name is Eibschutz. And I happen to be a direct descendant of Rabbi Yonasan Eibschutz." So right there, of course, that would be the nice, cute story. Just in 2 weeks, in a matter of a week, he meets descendants of the people he's been lecturing on and writing on for many, many years. But Rabbi Frimmer told me that he said that's not the end of the story. Now, I might have it backwards. I remember who the lawyer was and who was the judge. But one of them, I'm just going to choose one. The Emden man was a lawyer and said to him, to Rabbi Schneur Lehman, "So you have to hear a story. I was in court. I'm a lawyer. I'm a litigator. And I was in court. And the judge, all of a sudden, at the beginning of the case, before he started hearing the case, he looked at me, pointed and says, 'Counselor, chambers now.'" He had no idea why he was being summoned into chambers. And he says, "Do you know who I am?" He says, "Not really. It's the first time I'm appearing in your court." He says, "My name is Eibschutz. Your name is Emden. You know the story about our prior generations?" Actually, he says, "I do." He says, "You know what today is?" He says, "No." He says, "Today is payback. Get back in the courtroom." So I don't know what the end result of the court case was, but you talk about unbelievable lack of coincidence, but you understand what I'm saying. It's something that pretty much brings home in modern times. I said it sounded like a lot of like Hatfield and McCoy's, if you know that reference. Okay, so we're going to go back with that little diversion. We're going to go back now and talk a little bit more about the Jews in the 19th century England. The goal here is we're going to talk a little bit about them. We're going to talk then about Moses Montefiore, get into the Dreyfus affair, and then talk about Theodor Herzl and how that worked. And I'm kind of giving you a little bit of a preview of a few classes. Anyways, so at this point, economically, this is already getting to the later 1800s. The Jews are already advancing economically. They become bankers and merchants and become very popular in the city of Manchester, city of Liverpool. And they become merchants in the textile industry, the cotton industry, manufacturers, shopkeepers. And this whole it wasn't even a stereotype because it was true. But we'll use the word stereotype of the Jew in the early 1800s in England, of the peddler now becomes the Jew becomes more of a respectable businessman. So by the middle of the century, by the middle of the 1800s, this middle class, maybe even upper middle class of Jews is starting to emerge, anxious both to affirm their Jewish identity, but at the same time trying to assimilate into what's becoming more of a Victorian society. Remember, this is on the heels of the emancipation. This is the and the Jewish Haskalah movement and all this is still echoing in the background here. So we're about 1860 to 1880 now. Once we finish, it's about 1890. We're going to go backwards a little bit, but the 20 years of approximately 1860 to 1880. There is a bit of a consolidation that begins in the Anglo-Jewish community in England. Manchester becomes the second center of Jewish life. Liverpool becomes a key port, transatlantic trade, and there's a significant growth in Jewish communities in Birmingham, Leeds, Glasgow. Now, I will tell you, I've never been in England except to be in Heathrow, which itself was a nightmare many years ago. No, thank you. And considering, as we go through tonight's class, keep in mind things that are happening right now in England. I will tell you that I saw a statistic this morning that the amount of arrests in various countries around the world based on online postings. China, the 400 people arrested for something that posted online. Germany, in England, in the UK, I should say, maybe it was just England, it was 12,000 in 2013. Over 12,000 people have been arrested for online comments that were deemed inappropriate and offensive by the government. Got some problems there. But keep that in the back of your mind as we talk. In any case, so in these communities, what does it mean they're growing? Not just in business, they're also growing in somewhat of communal ways. They're building synagogues, they're building gemachim, like benevolent societies, schools, communal structures. So they're becoming true, larger Jewish communities. They are becoming upwardly mobile. That's to borrow a phrase from the I don't know, was it the yuppies? Was that the 80s? I don't even remember anymore. Young, upwardly mobile, whatever it was, and becoming again entrenched in the middle class. And the reason it's important to know that is what's going to happen soon. They now also, besides becoming merchants and selling wares and being involved in textile industries, they're entering new professions that until recently weren't allowed. They're going into medicine. They're going into law. They're going into academia. Obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but we know that this is going to get reversed in many parts of Europe, not that many years later. And the trajectory is being reinforced by philanthropy. The charities that the Jews have established for community members and for people pass through, hospitals, orphanages, soup kitchens, old age homes. The Jews' Free School in London becomes the largest Jewish educational institution in Europe, giving both religious and vocational instruction. So they're not only becoming businessmen, not only getting into academia, getting into professional what we call white collar professions, but they're also making a huge impact in the Jewish world, within their part of the world, when it comes to tzedakah. What was very encouraging at one point was that in 1871, university restrictions, which again, the Jews were restricted from certain things. It's hard to imagine that today, that in Britain, they would prevent Jews from attending a soccer match. I mean, who could even dream of something like that? Oh, yeah, they did. Or they can arrest somebody in the street for wearing a Magen David while he was standing across the street from a anti-Israel protest. Oh, they did that too. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you're better off. So all these things are running in the back of my head as I'm talking about the Jews are starting to grow in, it's just 100 and, 200, not even 200 years ago, 150 years ago. They get involved. So therefore they're in Oxford, they're in Cambridge as students, not just as professors, but now they're also Jewish students are allowed to study in these schools. They get involved in politics, which again, until recently, meaning at that time, was prohibited. Aldermen, sheriffs, mayors, barristers who were able to practice in higher courts. However, the Jews' lot is almost always going to be that there's going to always be a caricature, a perception of the Jew being a greedy, money-hungry, unscrupulous trader. And the prominence of some Jewish families, such as the Rothschilds, brought about both admiration and resentment. When you compare Britain to the rest of most of Commonwealth, not Commonwealth, continental Europe, they were generally at that point not in a big, bad way when it came to anti-Semitic actions. That was more for Eastern Europe that was going on, which we'll see has an impact in England shortly. The next 10 years, approximately 1880 to 1890, the Jews accomplished in those 10 years what prior generations, let's just say the past 100 years before that, even more. Remember, in the 13th century, Jews are thrown out of England altogether. You know, we all know about the expulsion of Spain, but we've learned here about the expulsion of Jews from England. Now, of course, they're back, and Oliver Cromwell and all that other wonderful stuff. But in these 10 years, this growth in the Jewish community in England of 1880 to 1890, they were at this point considered fully emancipated. They were equals legally to every other citizen in England. Now, why is that surprising? Because we saw that in France, yes, there was emancipation and there was freedom, but the Jew still wasn't necessarily considered completely free or equal. They were socially integrated. They were involved in literature and journalism and the arts. There was a newspaper called the Jewish Chronicle, founded in 1841, and became the voice of the community and would actually help to reinforce and stress this growth in the Jewish community. But, and here comes the big but, as they hit a peak, as this growth of Anglo Jewry, things going well, and finally the lowering of anti-Semitic attacks, something happens. And that something is pogroms are taking place in Eastern Europe. Jews are getting massacred, and they need to have a place to run to. They don't run to the United States. They run to England. And all of a sudden, you have thousands of different, I use the word element, different elements coming into the community. By the 1880s, Jews are running away like crazy from the Russian Empire because of pogroms, and many of them settle eventually in the East End of London. How do they come in there? They come in absolutely, what's the word? Typical central casting figures. They come in there speaking Yiddish, keeping their very traditional dress, very insulated, poor in many cases, and that causes tension in the established Anglo-Jewish community, who's now middle class. They're out there. Now come their poor cousins, so to speak, poor tarte mashma, meaning in both ways. And that they feared, the fear was that as these people, they've been trying to get away from this picture of who the Jew was, and they were able over the last many years to successfully do that. Along come all these other people, and so they're kind of embarrassed by them. And therefore, what happens? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Anti-Semitism starts to rise in the British society. There were already, prior to Hitler, remember, obviously Hitler's not part of this picture yet, there already is this idea of racial theories, of there's different blood and different races. And I'm not going to get into that now because we'll say that for our nemesis and hated human being Hitler, Yamach Shemo. Critics already are warning that aliens are going to come into the country, and they began this big debate about, wait for it, immigration rules. Nothing new under the sun. Shlomo Melech said in Kohelet, there's nothing new under the sun, period. When you look at the United States, and they have a problem with immigration laws. We talk about when we talk about Mandate Palestine and the idea of how many Jews are going to be allowed in, all this idea of immigration and what's going to do and what it's going to affect, nothing new. So the Anglo-Jewish community is facing a very complex challenge. How do they integrate this massive amount of people who are immigrating into the country while also wanting to maintain their position, maintaining this, I would use the word facade because maybe it would be a facade of we're different than they are. So this let's say 1800 to 1890, the trajectory of the Jews is going up, 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 hits the top, and now it's leveling off and starts to come down. It's a transformation because they started off as a marginalized, impoverished, restricted minority by the beginning of the century, and by the later part of the century, by 1890, again, things seem to have turned around. They're very much assimilated. They're much part of society in almost every single way. But the persistent prejudice against the Jew, what a Jew is, what a Jew does, the challenge of this mass immigration would reshape the community for decades to come. In order to understand where we're going from here, now that the reason I went back now to this about this 90 or 100 years of England was we also have to understand that the people who are products of that time, who are names that we know, such as we're going to talk about Moses Montefiore now, we have to understand where he comes from. He's born in 1784, so it's just before the time period that I was talking about. We're going to go back to the late 18th century, then into the 19th century. He lives to be 101. So he spans majority of the time period we've been talking about in this class and the last class. He's born in Livorno. His name was Moshe Chaim or Moses Chaim Montefiore. He was part of the Sephardic diaspora. Remember, I told you months and months ago that everything in history connects. Remember, we talked about when the Jews were kicked out of Spain in 1492, where they all end up going to, how that starts to roll in on itself, and where they all show up eventually. And now he's a product of that time period from a few hundred years earlier, because his descendants were forced out of Spain and then of Portugal and end up in this part of the world. His father, Joseph Elias, was a you'd think sometimes you hear the name Montefiore, whoa, he must have come from so much money. Every community, most Jewish communities, large communities, let's just say in the United States, I'm sure everywhere, but I'm just talking about the United States, there are certain names that you hear as old money. Yeah, I know the great-grandchildren of the original Mr. Cohn, who was fabulously wealthy, and every community has people like that. Many times there also tend to be some of the very big financiers of the community and big Balei Tzedakah, which is, or Hashem, they're the ones that what they're doing with the money and not leaving their billions of dollars to their next door neighbor's cat, which, that's whatever you want to think about that. But his father was a modest man of means. He was a merchant. His mother actually came from a distinguished Anglo-Jewish community, from a clan called the Makata. I didn't look into it. Mocatta, I think it's spelled. But evidently, again, with some good ties to finance and commerce. Eventually, when Moses Montefiore is a young boy, they already now moved from Italy. They've settled in England and become part of the British Commonwealth, as it were. The Chavetz Chaim, Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh Livracha, wasn't born with a sefer in his hand. He was born like any other child, a clean slate. Had a special neshama, and it became the Chavetz Chaim, one of the greatest people in Judaism. Lahavdil, you shouldn't say Lahavdil, but Moses Montefiore was not born a wealthy financier. He started off as a grocer's apprentice. He worked at a grocery store. You also think about Rav Ovadia. Rav Ovadia Zatzal was poor when he was growing up, and he made a deal he couldn't even afford to buy Sfarim. Now, if you ever saw videos of him in his library at his home, he had a humongous library, besides the fact that everything was in his head, an absolute photographic memory, but a massive library with multiple desks and computers and chairs, and he would zoom around in his office in this wheeling chair. But when he was a kid, when he wanted to learn, he made a deal with a bookseller that he would be allowed to sit in the back of the store without breaking the binding in any sefer, read the sefer in the back of the store, and then put it on the shelf. That's how he grew up. Moses Montefiore did not grow up as a multi-trizillionaire. He was a grocer's apprentice. But eventually what happens, in 1803, so that's going back now to the beginning of the time period of the overview we did of England, he becomes a member of the London Stock Exchange. Remember, when you're poor, you don't have a lot to lose. If you have, $500 to your name, The worst you're going to lose is $500. If you have $50 million, you lose 50 million. I don't know what that means, but I hear that's a lot of money. Anyways, he was one of the first and one of the few Jewish brokers on the London Stock Exchange at this point. And because it's the Napoleonic era of finance, this whole growth, which we've talked about again a few weeks ago, he prospered, and he prospered in a very big way. By 1812, we're only talking about 9 years, he gets married to a woman named Judith Cohn, who is the daughter of one of the richest Jews in England. And her sister married, wait for it, Nathan Mayer Rothschild. Money marries money. So two sisters, one's married to a Montefiore, one's married to a Rothschild. You could just hear the ka-ching every 5 seconds. A parenthesis. Unfortunately, over the centuries, there have been times when Jews have been it's been very apropos of what was said about Jews and money. And then you have people like Montefiore, and we're going to learn more about him now, and people like Rothschild, who did everything they could to finance whatever they could and do good with their money. And kol hakavod. So many years ago in Toronto, there was a business, O&Y, Olympia, New York, that declared bankruptcy. They were worldwide into many different industries. Their shita was that, and they came from nothing. That's what I understand. The shita was that wherever they were in the world, whatever the building, because they did into real estate, whatever buildings were going on, buildings stopped on Shabbat. No building, no anything. It didn't make it. In 99% of the time, people weren't even Jewish. Nothing, no building or anything. And they're going bankrupt and again recouping their lots of money, send shockwaves through many institutions around the world because they help bankroll with yeshivot and kolalim and schools. But again, the first point being of the story is that there are many good people out there who do a tremendous amount with their money. I wasn't at it. I know someone who was at a bat mitzvah with someone who is very rich. He's very rich. This goes back probably 25 years ago. And it was a very, very lavish bat mitzvah. I'm talking, all you needed was a chatan. You had a wedding. And the father of the girl of the bat mitzvah got up and basically said, I know what you're all thinking. I spent a fortune on a 12-year-old girl. And he didn't say the amount, but I guarantee you it was a tremendous amount of money, hundreds, probably close to $100-something thousand, and probably more. He said, but let me tell you something. I made myself a promise, and I kind of did this on purpose, that for every dollar I spent on this, I was giving another dollar to tzedakah. So I decided to put more into this, so I give more to tzedakah. He says, I could have given it all to tzedakah, of course. But this way I also explain and show my children the value of the dollar and show them what it means to give tzedakah. Again, I can't judge anybody. We can't judge. I think that was really cool. But when people do stuff with their money, God has given them something, again, like the Rothschilds and Montefiore family, it's amazing. So because of this alliance between the Rothschilds and Montefiores become family, Moses Montefiore himself becomes one of the center focal points of the Anglo-Jewish community as far as wealth and influence. There's an expression in Hebrew, it's actually Yiddishized Hebrew, Baal Hameya, Baal Hadeya, which means Baal Hameya, Baal Hadeya. They believe, like Tevye said in Fiddler on the Roof, the one who has the money has the knowledge. When you're rich, they think you really know. That's what Tevye said. Unfortunately, it's true. It's true. Money doesn't make someone smart. It doesn't make someone smart. Because you don't even have to be smart to make money. It helps, but there are people who make money because they inherited it. People who make money just by accident. Okay, whatever. But keep in mind, you only have what God lets you have. That's a cloud gadol. Anyways, this isn't a hashkafa class, so we'll move on. But Rothschild, along with Rothschild, or the backing, I guess, of Rothschild, Montefiore expands his business. He's no longer a stockbroker. He gets into overseas trading and insurance. He amasses a huge fortune. And by the age of 40 years old, he's able to retire for their secure financially for the rest of his life. Now, keeping in mind, we're going to see shortly, they'd live almost 61 more years. He was retired for a long time. I think, what is he going to do now? What's he going to do with his time? It's what he did with his, not that he was a successful stockbroker. It's not that he was a successful person in business and in finances and in insurance. It's what he did with his fortune. And it's what he did with his fortune that made him unforgettable and is a name that everybody knows. He chose, first of all, again, we're talking in the early part of the 19th, getting into the middle of the 19th century, which we've already seen how Jews are starting on this upward climb, but still not completely accepted in all throughout England. Montefiore chose to live openly as a proud Jew. Every day with a talis and tefillin, he would never said talit. Talis and tefillin, he kept Shabbat carefully, and he had a kosher home. Even when he traveled abroad, he was still keeping kosher. To some English Jews, of course, those who were assimilated, he was an embarrassment. Embarrassed by his, keeping his head covered, embarrassed by his going to davening, whatever it might be, because he seemed old-fashioned. But to many other people, he was a model that true a Jewish identity and honor can really bring to the Jewish people. 1837, remember, he was going back just a little bit. He was already the stockbroker on London Stock Exchange. He's elected to a position that, again, was shocking, and that was the Sheriff of London, which was one of the highest municipal offices a Jew could hold. Anybody could hold, but especially a Jew. That same year, he was knighted. That's why he was Sir Moses Montefiore. In 1846, already after he's retired, he is given the title baronet. I had to look up what that was. A baronet is not like a clarinet. A baronet's like a baron. It's a holder of a hereditary title in the British nobility. It's just the level below a baron and just above a knight. So now you know your British aristocracy, you're that much better off. These honors, though, were extraordinary because Jews were still barred from the parliament. If you remember, we saw a few weeks back in one of the earlier classes that Montefiore's brother-in-law is only allowed in 1858 to join the parliament. So that was like crazy. He takes a seat in the House of Commons. Remember, they discussed between the House of Commons and the House of Lords, they're all having their own rules, and that's why they were allowed to, at that point, the House of Commons allowed Jews to become members. But Montefiore's skyrocketing to the top of everything, became the president of the Board of Deputies for British Jews, and it's a position he held for 4 decades. I am not sure, this is off the top of my head, I have to check. You talk about the, what's it called? What's the name of the umbrella organization? Oh, my Lord. President, okay. He was in charge of a lot of people, a lot of money, a lot of institutions, but he was the president of the Board of Deputies. And what he was able to do with that position was to guide a community through a transformation. Because now we're talking, remember I told you just already a little while ago, of how the Jews are on their upward climb. Now they're reaching their peak. And he's in the thick of things right now, helping the transformation from these tolerated outsiders to emancipated citizens. And he had a hand in that as well. Because not just Jews, but non-Jews respected him because he was a good person. He wasn't just a person who had a lot of money. He became, in the eyes of Jews across the world, an advocate, a defender. He became known as the uncrowned prince of the Jews of the world. Pretty cool. Now, he did not sit still. He didn't sit still for a minute. He was a very busy man. And in 1840, right as he is finishing up at the stock exchange and he's retiring because he's a multi-bazillionaire, he goes to Damascus. He goes to there I'm not going to get into the story right now, but there was in Damascus in 1840, there was a Christian monk who accused the Jews of a blood libel. It was having tremendous problems in Damascus there were Jews that were thrown into prison, they were tortured. And he went there to plead on their behalf to explain this is absolutely not true. Jews don't need blood for matzahs. They get it to makolet, just joking. And he went there to appeal for help. Montefiore gets together with a French Jewish statesman whose name is Adolphe Crémieux, which is a name you might know if you're familiar with some of the streets in Yerushalayim. He goes to Egypt to plead with Mehmet Ali, who's the ruler who held Damascus under his rule. Eventually, Montefiore secures the release of the prisoners, and not just that, he's able to get the whole blood libel repudiated. It was as a dead deal altogether. Across Europe, across the Middle East, this had huge ripple effect. Now we're talking, keep in mind, we're talking before internet, we're talking before phones and smartphones and all. But this story, again, if you're familiar with the Bayless blood libel, if you're familiar with other blood libels and stories, you know that they caused tremendous amounts of problems, and it became very well known what was going on. So when he was able not only to secure the release of these prisoners, who again were being tortured, they are, and to have the whole blood libel repudiated, their Jews are celebrating all over Europe and the Middle East. They had special Thanksgiving with a lowercase t, Thanksgiving services. His name, Montefiore, became synonymous with Jewish dignity and Jewish dignity being restored. He had other missions. He saw himself, if I can intuit a little bit, he saw himself as a life that had mission and purpose. He went to St. Petersburg to Tsar Nicholas to talk to him on behalf of Jews who suffered in Russia. We really haven't spent any time on Russia, hardly at all. We did talk about Ukraine and talk about Kiev and massacres there as well. But in Russia, again, pogrom after pogrom after pogrom. And the fact that he was even received by the Tsar was something amazing. And he was able to accomplish some things for the Jews there. He goes to Morocco. He doesn't shoot low. He goes to the top guy. He goes to the Sultan of Morocco after other anti-Jewish violence. In 1867, he goes to Romania. He's looking for civil equality for Jews there. Tachlis, he's all over the place trying to help Jews. But his main goal that drew him mostly was the land of Israel, Eretz Yisrael. Between 1827 and 1875, he visited what was called Palestine at the time 7 times. So a little parenthetical story. From 2001 till 2009, 8 years, 9 years, whatever it was, I had the opportunity to come to Israel 21 times. Sometimes it was on mission, sometimes it's just because of the house, to check on the house. So my last trip here before we made Aliyah in July of 2009. So in June or in May, just before that, I was here. And I happened to be talking to one of my friends who'd been living here for many years. And I said, with some bit of boasting, I said, I have been here now 21 times in the last 9 years or 8 years. He says, no, you haven't. I said, what are you talking about? Here's my passport. Look. No. You didn't come to Israel 21 times. You left Israel 21 times. I said, oh, man, that was a dagger to the heart. If I didn't know I was making Aliyah 2 months later, I think I would just crawl into a hole in the ground. But he was right. I left 21 times. But I knew 19 of those times, I knew when I was coming back, when I got on the plane to go back to Chicago. But Baruch Hashem. In any case, so he comes to what was called at that time Palestine. 7 times during that time period, from 1827. So the course of about a little less than 50 years. It's like big deal. I mean, people come here 20 times in 10 years. You're thinking in modern terms. This is 100 years ago now. I'm talking 100 years ago, and 200. This is 1827. So we're in 2025. So it's like 200 years ago when he starts these series of journeys. It's not so simple. It's a very tough, it's before really strong railways and steamships when they made travel faster. But at that point, it was not that easy to travel here. Matter of fact, I've given this year at least 3 times, maybe more, about Mitzvat Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. And in this year, I mentioned how people who are not so hot and keen on making Aliyah, matter of fact, they said, Mashiach comes, Mashiach comes. They all quote a Tosfot in Masechet Ketubot. In Masechet Ketubot, there's a Tosfot that is the name of the man named Rabbeinu Chaim. Rabbeinu Chaim said, we cannot make Aliyah because it's dangerous. The roads are too dangerous to go. So they pointed, look, you see, right there, Tosfot said it, right? You don't have to go we shouldn't go. So, of course, when you want to make something look like you want it to fit your agenda, it's called confirmation bias. You find it. So multiple answers. I'm only going to tell you two. One, Rabbeinu Chaim was what's called Dat Yachid. No one agreed with it. Number two, he was maybe right in his time, like it was difficult for Montefiore in his time period as well. It was dangerous for sure in the time of Rabbeinu Chaim. We're talking about 1,500 years ago. Less. What am I talking? A little bit less than that. And well, it's definitely less than that. Sorry. You're talking is the children of Rashi. Rashi were 1,000 years ago. Okay, it was difficult. You mean to tell me it may have taken Rabbeinu Chaim, if he wanted to go, it may have taken 6 months and been in danger all the way. You got on a plane in the United States, you're going to come from the United States, and you're here 12 hours later. That's it. The only danger is you might have some food poisoning along the way, or you might have someone anti-Israel protest in your face. It's fine. So that doesn't hold water. So anyone who thinks that they're not making Aliyah because of Rabbeinu Chaim, send them my way, and I'll teach them something. Anyways, when he comes to Israel, at that time again called Palestine, it's not yet called the state of Israel, obviously. One of the things he is appalled by is poverty. The Jewish communities in Yerushalayim, Hebron, and Tzfat are absolute poverty-stricken. He personally says he takes upon himself to restore the dignity of the Jew to Israel. And he doesn't just send them money. You know, what's the line? Give a man fish, he has food for a day. Teach a man to fish, he has food for life. This is how it was his approach as well. He wanted them to become self-sufficient. So he invests in business, industry, agriculture, so they can then make themselves useful members of society, make money, and grow themselves. In 1860, in memory of his wife Judith, who had died 2 years earlier, he builds the neighborhood of Mishkanot Sha'ananim, which was the first Jewish neighborhood outside the old city walls, which is a story we're going to have to push off till when we talk about the 1948 war in 1967. We'll talk about that. For those of you who've been to Mishkanot Sha'ananim, the original number of houses are still there, and the little numbers on the door are still there. What was people had to be paid. Montefiore was paying people to go there and stay. They would sneak out at night, go back in the old city for protection, and was considered a poor area, became one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Yerushalayim today. But he builds, as you all know, I'm sure, the windmill, which is now active again, but doesn't do what it did then, to provide flour for the poor. And his projects are every project he invested in was for the purpose of making people who were poor, who were dependent on others, to allow them to have dignity and to thrive. To later Zionists, and it makes perfect sense, Montefiore was considered a precursor, not a political nationalist, though, but a philanthropist whose faith and generosity planted seeds. And those seeds were the renewal of the land of Israel. He became a legend while he was still alive. Hasidim spoke about him with awe. His image hung in the homes of many poor Jewish homes as considered a protective kamer, an amulet. He, of course, was a model of philanthropy. In 1884, he turned 100 years old. And communities across the Jewish world celebrated. They had all kinds of special davening and addresses and gifts. He died in July of 1885. And it was at that time in his city of Ramsgate, England, and buried then along his side his wife Judith. He had no children, but his legacy was vast. It showed then, and it showed till this very day, that Jewish wealth could be harnessed not for assimilation, but to strengthen the Jewish people. Orthodox Jews could move with dignity in the highest level of society because of him. He was a proud person. He was a knight. He was a baronet. He was a Victorian gentleman. He rose every morning to daven, and he became a symbol of Jewish pride who changed the world. Okay, now that is building we've seen like what were the 1800s in England. We saw an example of the philanthropy that becomes a bridge to early leading into eventually become Zionism. And next week, Bezrat Hashem, we're going to go back to a different part of the world, the same part of the world, different country. We're going to go to France, and we're going to learn about the Dreyfus affair. For those of you unfamiliar, stay unfamiliar. Okay, I want to teach it to you like it's a fresh, clean slate. If you know what it is, maybe come up with some things you weren't aware of. We'll learn about the Dreyfus affair, the presence, of course, of Theodore Herzl in press pool, and then, as they say, the rest is history. That's what we're going to learn. History, Bezrat Hashem. I wish you all a good evening, a Chodesh Tov. Tonight is the first night and day of Chodesh Mar Cheshvan. And I mentioned many years ago that I like to take the word mar, which means bitter, and turn it around, which means elevated. That we can take something that's bitter, we've been through bitter times, and we can elevate it. And hopefully that's our goal right now after Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. Now becomes the test if we're going to do what we're supposed to be doing. Have a wonderful evening, a wonderful day, and a good week ahead. And B'srot Tovot. Be well, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very well. Pleasure. Bye.